This is your host, Danny, and this is a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the free spirits of the molecular world. And today, of course, is a word power episode, so we're going to learn 10 new words in context. As usual, we learn words only in context because that will help you remember the words and actually use them and add them to your active vocabulary bank. Let me tell you about the words we're going to use today. We have ogre, bevy, tandem, careen, gossamer, palatable, cuisine, noxious, assault, and iridescent. So, are you interested? Of course you are. Now, let's jump right in and talk about those free spirits of the molecular world. But before we start, let me remind you that you can find all the practice you want to actually make these words part of your active vocabulary bank on my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. The link in the description will take you to the custom post I created for this episode where you get to practice and master these new words that you're going to learn, along with the myriad of learning opportunities you will find on my website. So while there, take some time, explore the site, and find out about the great learning opportunities you get there. But now, without further ado, let's start talking about the free spirits of the molecular world. Matter comes in three forms: solid, liquid, and gas. Of the three, gas has been the most useful to scientists. In fact, it was Robert Boyle's work with gases around 1660 that augured the science of chemistry some 200 years later. Boyle found that the volume of a gas decreases as pressure is applied to it, provided that temperature and other factors remain constant. In other words, if you squeeze a gas harder, it gets smaller. Moreover, the relationship between pressure and volume can be predicted quite exactly. If you double the pressure, the volume is reduced by half. Gases, it seems, are the free spirits of the molecular world, wandering around as they please unless confined. About 100 years later, French chemist Jacques Charles proposed that the volume of a gas is directly related to its temperature, provided the pressure remains the same. In this case, however, the volume of a gas increases as the temperature is increased. In the early 1800s, John Dalton, an English chemist, used the work of Boyle, Charles, and a bevy of others to propose a theory that all matter is made up of atoms and molecules. This theory signaled the beginning of the science of chemistry. Dalton defined an atom as the smallest particle of an element. An atom of oxygen, for example, is represented by the letter O in H2O, the formula for water. It is the smallest particle that has all the characteristics of oxygen. However, oxygen does not exist naturally as a single atom. In the atmosphere, two such atoms are linked one behind the other as a tandem molecule symbolized by the formula O2. Evidence that gases are free-moving molecules careening around us becomes apparent whenever something spicy is cooking, as odor is the most common method for detecting many gases. Baking bread, for example, releases millions of gaseous molecules into the air. Because these gases tend to move from areas of high concentration, say the kitchen, to areas of low concentration, like the living room, the odor spreads like a gossamer fog. Before long, the entire neighborhood knows that a palatable treat is being prepared in your kitchen. While advertising your choice of cuisine may not appeal to you, several industries depend on this property of gases. The effectiveness of perfume or air fresheners in combating noxious odors depends on these wandering gas molecules. Gas also plays a role in the generation of light. Travel down any main street after dark and your eyes are assaulted by numerous iridescent signs. These colorful displays are the result of a gas, usually neon, being energized by an electrical current. So that was our story for today, and that is the story of the free spirits of the molecular world. I hope you learned something. I know it is scientific today, but it is not the same every time, right? Sometimes we talk about history, sometimes we talk about mythology, but science is also very important. I just try to spice it up a little bit and add some variety to the topics we cover in English Plus Podcast. But of course, our main target for today is to learn 10 new words in the context of our story, The Free Spirits of the Molecular World. And these words, let me remind you again, these are ogre, bevy, tandem, careen, gossamer, palatable, cuisine, noxious, assault, and iridescent. So, are you ready to learn about these words and see what they mean? Well, this is exactly what we're going to do next. Well, let me start with the very first word, ogre. How do we spell this word? Because that is different from Shrek. This is something different. We're talking about a verb here, and it is A-U-G-U-R. How did we use that in context? We said, in fact, it was Robert Boyle's work with gases around 1660 that augured the science of chemistry some 200 years later. So what does that mean? To augur is to predict some future event as from signs or omens, something like to foreshadow something that's happening in the future. So that is the meaning of augur. That was only our first word. Remember, we still have 9 words left. Don't go away. The next word is bevy. B-E-V-Y. How do we use that in context? We said in the early 1800s, John Dalton, an English chemist, used the work of Boyle, Charles, and a bevy of others to propose a theory that all matter is made up of atoms and molecules. Well, what does that mean? A bevy of others to propose this theory of his. Well, a bevy of people is simply a group of people all together in one place. So we're simply talking about a group or company or set or even party of people, of course. So that was our word, bevy. That was the second word. Let's move on and talk about the third word, tandem. T-A-N-D-E-M. Well, how did we use that word in context? We said in the atmosphere, 2 such atoms are linked one behind the other as a tandem molecule symbolized by the formula O2. Now here we're talking about oxygen, of course. What does that mean? Tandem means 2 people or pieces of equipment that work together to achieve a result. So we don't have just O in the atmosphere, or at least we don't have it naturally occurring in the atmosphere. We always have them as a tandem molecule, O2, 2 of them working together to achieve a result. So when we talk about tandem in this sense, we're talking about, remember, 2 people or pieces of equipment or 2 atoms, like in our example, that work together to achieve a result. That's the meaning of tandem. But that's not everything. We still have more. There is the word careen, C-A-R-E-E-N. How do we use that in context? We said evidence that gases are free-moving molecules careening around us becomes apparent whenever something spicy is cooking, as odor is the most common method for detecting many gases. So what does that mean? To careen somewhere, what does that mean? To careen somewhere simply means to rush forward in an uncontrollable way. So to move forward, actually not move, to rush forward in an uncontrollable way, that is the meaning of careen. Of course, we can use it for things, like we talked about odors here and gases, or we can use it for people sometimes. So that was about careen. What about the next word, gossamer? G-O-S-S-A-M-E-R. How do we use that word in context? We said, because these gases tend to move from areas of high concentration, say the kitchen, to areas of low concentration, like the living room, the odor spreads like a gossamer fog. When we talk about fog, well, of course we know what fog is, but what is the meaning of gossamer fog? You use gossamer to indicate that something is very light, thin, or delicate. We're not talking about heavy fog. We're not talking about dense fog here. We're talking about gossamer, very light, very thin, or delicate. That's the meaning of gossamer. And we use that, we said the odor spreads like a gossamer fog to give you a mental picture of how odor travels. And of course, you must have seen that at least once or twice in your houses or in somebody else's house. That's the meaning of gossamer. And now for our next word, palatable. What does that mean? But first, how do we spell it? P-A-L-A-T-A-B-L-E. Palatable. So how do we use that in context? We said, before long, the entire neighborhood, and here we're talking about the odor that spreads, that keeps spreading everywhere, starts from the kitchen to the living room, then to the whole neighborhood, and before long, the entire neighborhood knows that a palatable treat is being prepared in your kitchen. So what does that mean? If you describe food or drink as palatable, you mean that it tastes pleasant, something delicious, tasty. So that is the meaning of palatable. It's not just that can be eaten, that would be edible. When we talk about edible, we say that, yeah, this thing can be eaten, but palatable is something else. Palatable is more. Not only can it be eaten, it is also delicious or tasty, palatable. So that was our word, palatable. What about the next word, cuisine? First, let's see how we spell that. It's Cuisine, cuisine. Now, you might think that cuisine is just like kitchen because it's a French word, and in French they use cuisine to talk about kitchen. Well, that's kind of true, but it's not exactly how we use it in English. When we talk about cuisine in English, we mean something a little bit different. Of course, connected to the kitchen in a way, but not exactly the same. First, let's see how we used it in our context. We said, while advertising your choice of cuisine may not appeal to you, several industries depend on this property of gas. So here we're talking about when we say cuisine, what does that mean? The cuisine of a country or district. What is it? It's not exactly the kitchen. It's not the place. It's actually the style of cooking that is characteristic of that place or country or what have you. So here, when we talk about cuisine, we say French cuisine, Italian cuisine. We're talking about the style of cooking, not a certain place in your home or in anybody else's home for that matter. All right? So that's the word cuisine. What about the next word, noxious? Noxious. Let's see how we use that in context. We said the effectiveness of perfume or air fresheners in combating noxious odors depends on these wandering gas molecules. So here, of course, we're done talking about baking bread and delicious stuff, or palatable, and we moved on to talk about some other things like air fresheners. And what do? They combat noxious odors. So when we talk about a noxious gas or substance, we're talking about something poisonous or very harmful, or to say the least, smells very bad. But noxious is more about poisonous and very harmful than just smelling bad, right? So that's what we mean by saying noxious odors. Poisonous or very harmful, even sometimes deadly, by the way. So that was our word noxious. Let's move on to the next word. We still have 2 words to go. Don't go away. Stay with me because we're going to talk about assault and iridescent right now. We're going to start with assault. ASSAULT. How do we use that in context? We said travel down any main street after dark and your eyes are assaulted by numerous iridescent signs. So here we have both words actually in this example. But let's start with assault. Your eyes are assaulted. Something attacks your eyes. Where here actually to assault someone means to physically attack them. And here we're talking about light, but technically it physically attacks your eyes. So here your eyes are assaulted by numerous iridescent signs. So simply assault means to attack, especially to physically attack. So that is our word, assault. And what about our very last word for today, iridescent? How do we spell this word? By the way, the spelling of this word is kind of tricky, so pay attention. It's iridescent, iridescent. So what does that mean? We just use it in the context. We said travel down any main street after dark and your eyes are assaulted by numerous iridescent signs. What are we talking about here? Of course, we're talking about light that attacks your eyes, and we're talking about signs here, iridescent signs. Something that is iridescent has many bright colors that seem to keep changing. And that is exactly what happens with those signs you see after dark. They have to be bright, they have to feature many bright colors that keep changing because they need to attract your attention to them. That's why we call them iridescent, okay? And we're talking about here, of course, the signs. So, these were our 10 words for today. I hope you enjoyed learning these 10 new words and you learned something new in today's episode as we talked about the free spirits of the molecular world. Remember the words we learned. We learned ogre, bevy, tandem, careen, gossamer, palatable, cuisine, noxious, assault, and iridescent. These words can be easily added to your active vocabulary bank if you just take it a step further. Take the link you can find in the description. Go to my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. There I have prepared a very juicy post specifically created for this episode where you can practice to your heart's content. And by practicing, you will make sure these words will become a permanent part of your active vocabulary bank. So just do it. Take your English and knowledge to the next level. Go to my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com, where you're going to learn a new thing every day. With that being said, this is your host, Danny. I would like to thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I'll see you next time.